Welcome to the Voices of LTCI, presented by the Helper Bees. This is a podcast about the industry that's shaping the way millions of older adults are aging, focusing on stories from those who got us here and those who are carrying us forward. These are the Voices of LTCI.
Hey everybody, I'm Shar Hugh. I'm CEO of the Helper Bees, and welcome to another episode of Voices of Long-Term Care Insurance. Today, we have Peter Lucas. He is CEO of Davies Life Health. I've known Peter for a long time now, and I'm very excited that he's here because he's got a really interesting career that he's going to dive a little bit more into, which is going from the carrier side to the TPA side. So talk a little bit about, I hope, share a little bit of knowledge of what it means to be a third-party administrator in our industry and how that may or may not be changing as the industry evolves. So Peter, really glad that you're on, and thank you for being here.
Well, thanks, Char. Very happy to be here today.
So always the first question, it's how did you get your start in long-term care insurance? Was it on the carrier side? Were you an actuary? What role did you play? Take us back to that first sort of event that brought you into our industry.
Yeah, so, it's the gray hair that I have. You have a long career behind you, but I was, let's say, it's only about 20 years ago that I actually got into LTC. So I had a career before then, but I worked for General Electric at that point in time, GE, and was one of those career moments where you say, what's my next role going to be? And so I was interviewing at different locations, and one of the interviews was with the LTC business that at that point in time GE had. And one of the things that actually made a big impact on me when I was interviewing was the amount of passion that people had for this product, which are like, wow, this is really different than I've seen in some other places where people, this is what we're doing. But here, people actually cared not just about the product, but also the impact the product had. And that gave me the feel of, I want to be part of this. And so that was actually early 2003 that I made the switch into that. So it's indeed 20 years now. And so that was really impactful. So I actually spent only a year in what they call the product development area. And after that, as you might still remember, GE sold off their insurance business, and that became Genworth. And so we went from a GE to Genworth. And Genworth at that point in time was basically the largest carrier in the industry. But they were a big individual player and had no group business. And of course, there were some competitors of us at that point in time that were in the group. So after about a year, having to get to know a little bit about the individual product, I was asked by Buck Stinson, who was the CEO at that point in time, to set up the group business. So it's actually I was building the group business for Genworth at that point in time. And I've heard you say on some of those podcasts with other guests before about what a small world this is. So guess who became my TPA? It was Peter Goldstein. And so Peter and I know each other also for almost 20 years now. And LTCG, now Lumifin, was the TPA that we used at that point in time for building the group business. So it's a small world, as you can hear. One of your other guests I heard talking about the AARP account, and it was Jody who with MetLife got the AARP account. So a couple of years later, when AARP was looking for, let's say, put their account to bid, I led the effort on behalf of Genworth to actually go after it. And the good news is we won that account. And what you will see is, I worked at that point in time with Aaron Ball, who's now at New York Life. And when Aaron moved to New York Life, where did the AARP account go? Went to New York Life. So, we all know each other a little bit, and we have common history here. And that's why I think it's good and important to have strong relationships within the industry here in general. That was basically, my carrier life was building group, doing AARP, and then also at one point in time I was responsible for the distribution through the financial institutions. So think Edward Jones, think Ameriprise, and then I left. So I made the switch, as you referred to, Char, earlier on, made the switch to go from the carrier to a very small TPA at that point in time, TriPlus, That was an interesting career change, but it's good to be on the other side as well. And let's say what a carrier looks for. I knew what I was looking for when Lumafin was the TPA, and also know what, let's say, the value proposition that I thought was a good one on the go-forward basis for TriPlus. And so that I thought was an interesting switch, and also for the team at TriPlus, which I thought was very talented. At that point, they only had one big client as part of their business. So they treated that client as whether they were the insurance company, which actually is a really good way to think about it. Is you really want to step in the shoes of the insurance company and just act, behave, and act culture as whether you are them. At the same time, we had to make sure that we recognized that we weren't the insurance company. We were an independent TPA, and wanted to make sure that we changed the way we thought about that part also a little bit.
Well, that's interesting. I was at a dinner with Steve Surface and Dan Reese over at Trans, and they actually mentioned you and TriPlus. And Steve said, if they write a book about long-term care insurance, there's going to be at least one chapter, and I'm paraphrasing, on TriPlus. Is there anything that you can shed? Because he was just so impressed with the work that, frankly, you and your entire team did early on, relatively small. I don't know all the challenges that were faced, but according to some people who've been in the industry, who are luminaries in the industry, that was a massive shift for our industry as a whole. Just that little TPA of TriPlus being able to do what you did. Anything that you can share or allowed to share around, I wouldn't call it a turnaround because I don't think that's how it was cast, but I think it was an expansion of scope, an expansion of capabilities from a fairly bleak picture early on. Is that a fair characterization?
I think it's a fair characterization that we have made big steps forward. Let's put it that way. So yeah, no, I'm very proud of the team that we had at that point in time. Proud of the team that we have today about the change we've made. Happy to hear that the industry is recognizing that. And people like Steve Surface have recognizing that we made those steps forward. It was we took a very pragmatic approach here where we said, hey, what are our current strengths? And if I would be the insurer, what would I be looking for? And try to match our value proposition with our strengths and recognizing what those were, and then link that up with the right type of carrier. So clearly early on, we were not in a position, let's say, to go after large blocks. And we recognized that. So we had to build the trust in the market and did that step by step with smaller accounts initially. And the accounts started to grow from size. And with that also I would say the industry started to trust more, mostly also because we actually delivered upon what we promised. And I thought that was a big deal for us. So we want to make sure that we always, let's say, were honest about our capabilities, not overstating it. And then when it came true that we were able to deliver upon expectation, and many times beyond expectation. And I think that started to, at one point in time, let's say, change also our own confidence in our own capabilities, and know that we were good at what we were doing.
So it sounds like that was a big milestone for you, moving from GE going to Genworth and then TriPlus at the time. Are there any other large significant milestones? This could be an event development within our industry that you will point to that's been really formative sort of to you.
Yeah, and I mentioned a couple here, right? So I did mention a couple early on. I say what I believe is what formed me to make sure that I was able to step in the shoes of my clients, right? And having been the client itself, what you like about, let's say, a TPA or a service provider in general, and what the things that you probably less appreciate. And so we kept that. The good news is TriPlus actually had some of that culture already. So I definitely don't want to take full credit of any of that, because we had really good people there but basically strengthening that belief and the support of the board that we had at that point in time to do so, our investors to do so. I thought that was important. If I look back at my career in general, it is every time that we were able to get clients to convince clients of our value proposition and the value we could bring was a big moment for me if they gave us the trust to do so. And so we had that a couple of times. I mentioned the AARP account. I think was a big one for TriPlus. It was a big one when LTCI and Olga selected us to actually handle the Pen block at that point in time. So that was a big switch where we took over a lot of the people and infrastructure that Pen had at that point in time. So I do believe that it was an instrumental moment for TriPlus to make that change. And I'm very proud to say, most recently, MassMutual actually made the same decision when they went to market and to select their new TPA, and they selected now Davies as their new TPA. And we are right now in the middle of the conversion process to bring that block on board. So, and for some of those who always have been thinking of TriPlus as, hey, you're the carrier for the smaller blocks, I think we could now make the argument is we are past that stage, and that we are now also, let's say, in the market for the larger blocks and where more capabilities are needed. So that feels good. Now you ask me what drove that change. I do believe that the acquisition by Davies of TriPlus in late 2020 has been a really big part of that change. So the being part of Davies gives us access to significantly more resources in general. There's a large technology team as part of Davies, and I think the trust in the stability of the company actually has dramatically grown. Large carriers feel trust in Davies right now is about 7,000 employees worldwide, and growing. And so I think there's a belief that Davies is there for the long term. And with that, let's say the services that we offer will be there for the long term.
Wow. Well, I know you said it, but I want to make sure we underline. I mean, that's a huge win for you guys over at Davies. So congratulations on the MassMutual block. As you sort of alluded to, I mean, the capabilities that Davies has now brought, I'm sure, played a role in that earning of significant business. You said something earlier too that I think also must have contributed to something like a MassMutual, which was like identifying or at least presenting yourself to earn trust within your customers. And that's a thread that I've heard you say over the last several minutes, which is you have your value proposition as a company, but you have to earn the trust, you have to earn the relationship. And sometimes that's by putting yourself in their shoes as a carrier, as a policyholder, speaking that language, but designing your technology and your services for those unique value propositions can be a form of earning trust. And I think that's a really significant value for other providers out there who are trying to do good work and partner with either large TPAs like you guys or large carriers. I think a lot of people think it's just about the product, and it is. If the product stinks, it's you're not going to go anywhere. But earning trust, because in our industry, it's a long-standing relationship. You're not cutting a deal for 6 months or 3 months. Ideally, these are many years, and there's a lot of lives that are counting on it. So trust has to be that bedrock, and I hear you echoing that consistently. And so congratulations to you and to the Davies team.
Thank you, Char. Yes.
So along that, so you just painted a nice 20-year picture. You've gone back 20 years from GE to Genworth. Along the way, as you've risen in the ranks and now are CEO and leading a big division, what are some major personal lessons that you've learned that you've applied in your professional life? What is anything that has stayed with you to influence your philosophy or your management or even the way that you remain productive?
Yeah, so they are basically from over a period of time, and I have a couple of examples of things that I've started to apply over time, right? So what not all of the people probably will know that my background, actually, I started off at the Dutch version of West Point, so as a military career officer. Didn't stay too long in there, but I I finished the academy, spent another 4 or 5 years in the army, and then moved to GE at that point in time. But one of the important things there that you learned is the time between action and today and the moment and when you have to go in action. You have to make sure that you take time to think through what your solution is. So don't jump to conclusions right away. Actually, take the time to think. And then, as they always say, keep it simple, right? So sometimes we think making very complex things and keep them complex. But if you are able to make them relatively simple, and you can take the time to communicate that well, then you can actually focus on the execution afterwards, so that there's no confusion of what we're doing, where we're going. And I think that has been an important thing, helping the teams that I led to make sure that there was clarity on where we're going, and then also making sure that everyone was clear on the path we were taking, and then trying to allow them the freedom to make their own decisions, but stay within the boundaries that still all led to the right place, that we didn't go left or right. So I think that was an important one in general. Now, almost feels like the opposite of that, but one of my bosses at one point in time say, "Hey, you have good instincts, so trust them." In other words, don't overthink certain things, right? So sometimes you have to think it through, especially when but sometimes you also just have to trust your instincts and go with it. And so you have to balance those two at the same time almost. So it's the third one, and my team will actually, will hear you say that I typically put things in what I call the 3-stack theory, right? And I think that's an important one, in the form of, there are a lot of things that are being asked of us as individuals, as professionals. I always kept 3 things in mind. There's the things that your boss wants you to do, so you probably need to be aware of what it is that he or she is looking for, right? Then you have a good sense of what it is that you want to do in order to do a good job, and think that how you need to perform, and make sure that you get to that. Because what frequently gets in the way, there are a lot of other people that are asking things from you that actually get in the way of you doing a good job or delivering what your boss is asking for. Frequently, we want to be very nice people. I want to be a nice person, but if your nicety gets in the way of getting the things done that are crucial for success, you're not helping anyone. And so therefore, I think it's important to make sure that you understand what is what. And I think that has helped probably clarify things. And you heard me making things simple, making sure that you know where you're going. That has helped people and the teams that I work with, and also myself, to make sure that we were focusing on the right things.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you've gone from keep it simple, but analyze, do your due diligence, and then also acknowledge when you need to just trust in your gut and your instinct. Those are so challenging. It's challenging in an industry that is experts at assessing risk. When do you dive in? And I think for us as a small company at the Helper Bees, that's been a challenge for us, is you don't have that large body of information to rely upon, because by definition, we're pushing the envelope forward. And so instinct and gut and preparation are all we can rely on. And so that's interesting to hear you say, and really highlight that push and pull of instinct and preparation. Which leads me sort of to the next question that I've been really dying to ask, is around third-party administrators, so TPAs. What is your instinct? What is your gut telling you around where the TPA world is moving? Do you see it evolving as long-term care insurance itself evolves? What do you see the role of TPAs, and what are you particularly at Davies doing about it?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chara. And this is one that I think starts, and many of your guests have shared their thoughts about where the industry is going. One part of the industry, I think, is we are redefining what we define as our industry, right? It's a different industry today than where it was, let's say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. There are many third parties in this ecosystem, I would say, that play a role. With that, I think from an industry standpoint, and I will get to your question in a minute, bear with me here. We are a much more professional industry today than where we maybe were 10 years or 20 years ago. I think there's a larger embracement of innovation, and companies like the Helper Bees are bringing that to the table here, where we're going. There's much more investment in technology, recognizing that technology has its place and where we're going. And then with wellness, let's say, how do we make sure that you pilot the right ones, right? So as an industry, you have to find the right place. So how do you work in that as a TPA? I think you have to make those investments, and especially in the technology, where I do believe there's the bolts and nuts and bolts in doing the work, recognizing what it is that makes the difference between good and bad work. And then if you define what good work looks like, how can you automate some of that? But how do you also make, and I talk about claim decisions, 80% of the claim decisions are relatively simple. The other 20, you actually either make the right or the wrong decision if you don't know what you're doing, right? So how do we make sure that we have the human intellect there, but also you use machine learning in order to differentiate between those two, right? And so we're doing some experiments with that right now, and more to come on that world. And I truly believe we're not the only ones who are doing that, but that I believe is a place where, as an industry or as a TPA, we have to work. The next one is probably a little bit more ambivalent, and because different TPAs take a different approach here. And my team and I want to be very agnostic about some of the other service providers, right? So whether you talk about assessment providers, about wellness providers, we don't have an agenda to drive, this is the wellness provider or the assessment provider you have to have. If you're a TPA who has assessments as a capability, clearly you would prefer to use your own capabilities there, right? So I think the industry is moving, and if you are not agnostic to, let's say, who are the providers in that industry, you might actually not provide the service that your client is looking for. So that is personal belief, but that's also what at Davies we are following at that point in time. Now, the last part, and it's the investment in technology. I think data analytics become more and more important for us. So as a TPA, we have to make sure that we have the right infrastructure and can support our clients to actually do the analytics that they're looking for. And so if you think about those three things in general, being agnostic, making the investments, and knowing, and as you said, is where to put your time and energy in, and I think that's important. So hopefully that gives you kind of a view of what we're investing in.
Yeah, I'm not going to attest to a lot of that. I mean, we work with you guys on what you call like the nuts and bolts, and you always have a multi-vendor strategy. And I think the goal there is that agnosticism that you're talking about, where you let sort of the best provider or even maybe the carrier dictate it, and you play through that conduit. But what's interesting about Davies, and at least my personal experience with you guys, is your ability over the years to talk about some of the innovation that we particularly would have. You haven't deployed all of them, but I think your goal is to understand what's out there in the industry. If a carrier should come to you and want these tools, you'll be ready to speak, not only knowledgeable about it, but we also talk about implementation, how practically you might go about it. And so it's not just a conversation; it's actually diligence for a particular avenue that you might travel down. So, I mean, I absolutely can attest to the fact that Davies in general, you guys are thinking about where the industry is moving and what role can you play. Should a carrier need to launch even some new, like you mentioned, digitization or new wellness programs?
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that, Char. I want to expand on that a little bit, because one thing is saying, hey, I can have, let's say, a wellness vendor being part of the solution. And how do you make sure that it's almost like a seamless experience, right? Both for either the policyholder or for the carrier. And so we are very big on making sure that we integrate on API level. So it's not just, it really becomes, let's say, one solution versus a hodgepodge of things. So I think we are very big into that. And I have to give my team credit for having the ability to do so, and making sure that that's a big focus of how we operate.
Yeah, I think you guys in our industry might be the only, or at least the first to our knowledge, to launch an exposed API for any part of the claims process. And I don't think that's widely known, but at least to our experience, I mean, it's a pretty significant achievement. And I know it wasn't easy to do, but you guys had the foresight and the fortitude to build it, because it's hard. And what's particularly challenging, not just the technical aspects of it, is maybe you can speak to this. Were you concerned you're building a bridge to nowhere? Meaning, great, you have an exposed API. Were you ever concerned that other vendors couldn't hit it, or that the carrier didn't need it? Or was it purely just this, hey, we're going to build it and they'll come?
It's a mix of those two, Char. So, the analogy that I sometimes use is kind of a hub and spoke model, right? So we want to be the hub for all those services. And I make a differentiation between some of the things that are basically, are proven innovations in the industry. So if you think about EVV and things like that, that's there to stay, right? So we know it's going to be there. So clearly that's an area where we want to do the API integration right away. Now, there might be some wellness programs initially we want to accommodate, but might not fully integrate. So I think there's a difference between when there's a proven capability or a proven success rate in the market of certain solutions. We want to make sure that we do it on an API level. When it's just a small pilot early on, we probably don't go all that way, because you don't want to go good money after bad, right? So it's a fine balance. You want to make sure that you are flexible, put those pilots out, get success. If it's success and is there to stay, integrated.
Well, on behalf of all the EVV vendors, we're one of them in our industry. Thank you for saying essentially that EVV is table stakes now. And it used to be one of those things that might be innovative, but now it's just something you absolutely have to have as part of the new modern caregiver and policyholder experience.
I would agree with you there. Yeah.
Great. We'll close it there. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. More importantly, thank you for everything you've done for the industry. It's a breath of fresh air to hear that as a TPA, technology is really a core tenet and a core investment area for you guys, but not applied indiscriminately and not applied just because it's cool. Applying it because of using your role or your historical role as a carrier and understanding that perspective and deploying tools that will have high impact to the policyholders and the carrier in general. So we appreciate that, and thank you again.
Thank you, Chad. It was great to be here.